Welcome back to the report. Following the shootings in Paris, there have been many vigils and commemorations taking place not only in France but across the globe, with outright condemnation from leaders as well as from the general public. But what do these events mean for the Muslim community, especially in the UK? Adama Munu has this.
One French businessman this morning said that the Paris shooting that took place yesterday was the 7/7 of France. The shootings at the magazine publisher Charlie Hebdo in Paris, which killed 12 people, has caused worldwide condemnation and international solidarity with the French people, from politicians, journalists, religious leaders, and people from all walks of life. Headlines of what took place that fateful morning has unsurprisingly taken the front pages of newspapers across the globe, as shocking details of the event are revealed. Whilst the manhunt against the suspects continues, France today is in a state of national mourning. A minute's silence was held today at the Notre Dame Cathedral to remember those who had died. Last night, Je suis Charlie, or I am Charlie, was the phrase used by many across the world in a stand against the attack in what is seen as the defence of the freedom of expression. Marked vigils and minute silences in countries all over the world have been taking place in Australia, Britain, and as well within mainland Europe. Religious leaders have also joined tributes, making clear that the shooting in Paris was as much an attack on Islam as it was on the French community.
İslam peygamberinin adının kullanılarak bir intikam duygusuyla yapıldığı söylenen bu katliam, rahmet ve barış elçisi Hz. Muhammed'in bütün insanlığa kazandırdığı yüce değerleri yok etmeye yönelik açık bir saldırıdır. Başka bir ifadeyle bu saldırı, İslam'ın ve bu yüce dine mensup Müslümanların kendisine doğrudan yapılmış bir saldırıdır.
The UK was also taking caution. This morning, a Cobra meeting was underway as Home Secretary Theresa May met with government ministers, police and members of MI5 and MI6. Last August, the terror alert was raised to severe, meaning that a terrorist attack is highly likely in Britain. May last night said that Britain was standing with France at this time for freedom of speech and democracy and against terror, also warning that the terror threat to the UK is grave and relentless. Countries across Europe are also on high alert. The question comes in as to what the implications of this event will be for the UK's security. There has also been concern on possible reprisals against the Muslim community in France and in other countries within Europe. I spoke to Salman from Islam21c about the effects that this event could have on the Muslim community within the UK and how the Muslims should react to acts committed in the name of freedom of speech.
We need to understand is, if we now look at in hindsight what this has done, is this has caused many more artists around the world to, come up with more cartoons and, basically offend more Muslims. I think there are extremists on both sides of the spectrum. We have far-right extremists and you'll have Muslim extremists who both try to push out the narrative where it's a clash of civilizations, it's Muslims versus the West and so on. What needs to be clear is that we are all living on this planet in different countries, etc. And we all need to work and get along together for the common good. And I think if we pander to this rhetoric of them and us, it will just create more hatred, more bigotry and intolerance. And in the end, it's just a vicious cycle and it will repeat itself.
Muslims and non-Muslims alike have stood together to condemn the actions of the gunmen against Charlie Hebdo. But there is also fear that reprisals against Muslims may occur despite condemnation, and one that fits a them and us narrative. Yet again, Muslims and Islam are under the spotlight, and possibly for all the wrong reasons. Adama Munu, The Report.
Well, joining me in the studio is Cerie Bullivant, who's spokesperson at Cage, and on Skype we're joined by Dr. Salman, who's chief editor at Islam21c. Welcome to the show, Cerie. We've heard quite rightly condemnation of this attack right across the political spectrum and from every quarter of the society, including from Muslims. But we're now moving into a territory where it looks as if there will be a backlash. 4 grenades thrown into a mosque in France, bullets fired at a mosque in France. Do you think this is going to cross the channel? Do you think this is something that the Muslim community here will face?
Well, the fact is that we're already facing it. At this time when everyone's talking about this as an attack on the freedom of speech, on the very same day in Parliament we had a reading of the CTS legislation, which is looking to bring in legislation to ban conservative speakers, banning imams from giving lectures. So these double standards will constantly keep on causing friction between the communities as long as we keep going down this path all of the time.
Salman, do you think that's right? I mean, there's one Tory MP today calling for the repeal of the Human Rights Act in the wake of this. Do you think this is where we're headed?
I agree. Unfortunately, I mean, I've been watching the rhetoric surrounding responding to this event, and unfortunately, a lot of opportunists are jumping on board to try and make their own and score their own political points. We've already seen today Nigel Farage use this as an excuse to, say multiculturalism has failed. We've seen Douglas Murray, equally incendiary individual, claim there's some kind of secret agenda here to, prevent people from criticizing Islam. And we've seen, unfortunately, many people, like the leader of the Liberal Democrats Party, try and score points in just showing how liberal they are and turning this into an issue of free speech, when in fact, in my opinion, and many others who've been writing on this subject, it's not an issue at all of free speech. It's something far more nuanced than that. But unfortunately, it's hard to navigate this with all the rhetoric, with all the people trying to make their own respective political points. This is why at Islam21c we're trying to filter through that and provide some nuanced analysis from all corners, from different sides of this debate.
Cerie, I mean, it's interesting that the original kind of narrative, and still probably the strongest one, is that this is to do with religion. But now that we know something about the people who carried it out, it appears in a different light. It appears that it is connected. They're Algerians. Many Algerians in France will have been on the wrong end of the French state. Let's put it no higher than that. And they're people who were involved in the war in Iraq as well, it seems. So there is a connection with foreign policy, even though that's often denied, isn't there?
Well, this is the thing at the moment. What we see is that the common narrative that's pushed is this conveyor belt theory, that people become religious and therefore, as a natural extension of that, they become violent. The empirical evidence is completely to the opposite, though. The fact is the things that drive people to these actions, and in the case of the UK, we had a similar style of attack in Adama and the Woolwich killing. And when you look at the factors around the people, and unfortunately not as much is known about the case in France, but if we look at Adama, for example, we see that the security services were threatening to have his brother tortured, and they put him in that war setting, they put him in that war mindset. When Farage talks about multiculturalism working, well, France actively and openly say that they don't support multiculturalism. They ban the niqab. They say that they push this narrative of trying to get everyone to integrate, as it were, into French culture, French society. And we see that that process isn't working either. So I think that there has to be some clear blue sky thinking about how we deal with relations between Muslim communities and the wider community. And there has to be some sky blue thinking about what are the actual causes of terrorism.
Salman, I mean, you mentioned the comments by Nigel Farage. I mean, Farage, it was quite a striking statement when he described these people as a fifth column, and it's hard to think that he meant terrorists there. He meant the whole Muslim community, or seemed to, didn't he?
Of course, this is what I meant by people trying to hijack the discussion and these tragic events for their own ends. I mean, Cerie brought up a really important issue, and that is France is probably the most repressive of all the Western nations when it comes to the Muslim community and them displaying their symbols of their faith in public. I was just at a conference a few weeks ago, and a Muslim woman was almost in tears, saying that when we come to the UK, we actually feel free. We can go out, we can take our children out, and we can express ourselves. And they can't do this in France. And those people arguing to make Britain more like the French model, I don't think they have a leg to stand on after seeing yesterday's events.
I mean, Cerie, there's an element of this which is simply fear, isn't it? That people react. Not surprisingly, people react badly or when they're afraid. Do you think there's any sensibility among the people who commit this thing, these crimes, that the people who are going to most suffer from what they do, apart from the immediate victims themselves, are going to be the Muslim community?
I think what we have here is a cycle of fear, and that cycle of fear feeding into hatred. So if you look, for example, at the Muslim community in the UK, we're constantly portrayed as a threat, as you said, a fifth column, and this threat of terrorism. And so people have a fear, obviously, related to that terrorism. The scenes that we saw of the police officer getting shot were incredibly shocking. And then that fear gets put upon the Muslim community and enacted as a hatred. Kill all Muslims was trending number 6 on Twitter yesterday.
Globally.
And that happens in reverse as well. So as the Muslims become a symbol of fear and hatred for the non-Muslims, you see the sort of double standards that we were talking about earlier on, with legislation to ban speakers, with cases where a Muslim sister posts things on Facebook which are completely inappropriate, and she gets 6 years. An EDL guy has 2 bombs with 187 pieces of shrapnel, and he gets 2 years. 6 versus 2 for posts on Facebook versus bombs. And this leads to in the Muslim community, fear and hatred. And this is a slippery slope of a circle of violence.
Salman, I mean, Cerie, paints a very powerful picture of 2, mutually reinforcing and destructive poles at work there. Is there a political stance that Muslims should take which would break this cycle?
To be honest, it's personally for me, it's a bit too early to comment on the actual motives behind this event. So Muslims in the UK, at least, that I've been exposed to, they unfortunately feel the need that they must condemn, they must almost apologize for these actions whenever a Muslim does something. And unfortunately, it ends up looking like they're almost taking ownership for these crimes whenever a Muslim does a crime. So I don't think that particular method is helpful, although I do understand the desire, a natural desire to condemn or distance oneself from something abhorrent or something as criminal as this. However, I wait for the Muslim community to perhaps mature in our discourse and be able to see past the rhetoric and the sensationalist language used when talking about these types of things. Because at the end of the day, these events, they should be treated like any crime. They should be treated like any criminal investigation. If you have a murderer, you establish a motive, you see what happened, why they did it, and so forth, and then you aim to try and prevent it happening again. Unfortunately, we've fallen into the narratives that have already been written for us by people with arguably anti-Islamic agenda, and that is whenever a Muslim does a crime, it's plastered all over the internet or the newspapers, and it's his or her Islam. Rather than being incidental in the crime, it becomes a causative factor. So this is some kind of Muslim attack or Muslim terrorism. Whereas I would argue that we should just see this as a murder, not even terrorism in the first place, because these people they, by the looks of it, they attacked people who they perceived to be insulting them or someone dear to them. Just like on a playground, if one child insults another child's mother, that child may feel upset. So most of us would just shrug it off and ignore the person, but some people may be prone to a violent response. Looking instead through the lens of terrorism and national security is wholly unproductive. And as Cerie mentioned, only a few days ago, Arun Kudnani, he completely refuted comprehensively this notion that when some kind of violence happens, it's to do with someone's ideology, it's to do with someone's, even if they're so-called extremist Muslim. And these have been empirically shown to be false in any sense of understanding. So, for example, not all those who commit to so-called terrorist violence, not all of them are motivated by ideology. And more importantly, the vast majority of those people, even with a so-called extremist ideology, they don't resort to terrorist violence. So obviously there are other things at play here.
I mean, Cerie, surely one response is to say freedom of speech, of course, and to condemn, quite rightly, attacks on freedom of speech. This is bound to work, since for every one attack on freedom of speech that happens to other people by Muslims, there are 5 others that happen to Muslims by other people. So, I mean, to be the best defenders of freedom of speech is one necessary response, is it not?
Well, this is the point, the problem with the legislation that we're bringing in. We're bringing in legislation now that is going to, by its very nature, by making prevent statutory, it's going to legislate what is and isn't an acceptable form of Islam. So we're going to have direct government interference in the religious affairs of an entire community. On top of that, we're going to have the government vetoing which imams are good and which imams are bad, and saying which ones can and can't speak. If anything, at the moment, we're talking about freedom of speech, and at the same time bringing one of the most damaging pieces of legislation to get rid of freedom of speech. On this issue of what should the Muslim reaction be to break this cycle, I think the Muslims time and time again put themselves forward and say, not in our name. And I think that, as Salman said, that this is perhaps a very visceral reaction to what they see happening. But it's generally, the responsibility is with the people with power, the people who have the ability to change the narrative on a much larger scale, and who have that big voice and that ability at their fingertips. When you're in a bad cycle with a child, it's not the child's obligation to break that cycle, but the parent, because they're the one with the responsibility and the power in that relationship. So I think that there should be questions asked of the state about what they're doing to break the cycle of violence.
Okay, Cerie Bullivant, Salman, thanks very much for that. But I'm afraid it's all we've got time for on this episode of The Report. I want to thank all my guests on today's show, and thank you at home for watching. Do remember that you can keep up with us on Twitter by following @IslamChannel and using the hashtag #TheReport. But for now, we'll leave you with some of those scenes from Lebanon, where Syrian refugees who escaped the conflict in Syria are now having to battle with the winter cold. We'll be back tomorrow, so do join us then. Till then, good night.